We continue now at the top of Daf Memches Amid Beis and Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 48b. The Mishnah says, Lo yeshev betzila, a person should not sit in the shade of an asherah tree. And Rashi explains, Lo yeshev betzila, you shouldn't sit in the shade of the tree. Haitzel lav tachas nofa ilanhu. Rashi says, when we talk about the shade of the tree here, we're not saying you're sitting underneath the actual branches of the tree. Because if that was the case, if you sat directly beneath the branches of the tree, it would not say that you're tahor if you sit there, because you would actually be tummy, you would be impure if you sat there. Tahakatani seifa, because it's going to say at the end of the Mishnah, lo yavor tachta, it's going to say you can't walk under the tree. Vim avar tamei, and if he walks under the tree, he's tamei. Ela min ha'ilan v'hala. Rather, what it means when it says you can't be in the shade of the tree, it means you're still beyond the tree, but you're in the shade of the branches. Hilkach lav oelhu. Therefore, it's not an issue of oel over here, because he's not under the tree, he's just in the shade of the tree. Shekashachama b'mizrach o b'mayrav. When the sun is in the east or the west, yesh l'chol adam tseil orach. Everybody has a long shadow. Ukashachama omedes be'emtza rakia. When the sun is in the middle of the sky, ein l'chol davar tseil el tachtav. Then the only place where there's shade is right beneath. And so here we're talking about the shade of the tree, but not directly under the tree. Again, lo yeshev betzila, a person shouldn't sit in the shade of the asherah tree. V'im yoshav tar, but if he does sit in the shade of the asherah tree, he is pure. V'lo yavor tachteh, he shouldn't walk under the tree. V'im avar tamei, and if he walks under the tree, he is tamei, he is impure. Haisa gozeles es harabim. Now, if the tree, the asherah tree, is stealing from the public, meaning to say it's in the branches are hanging over the Rishos HaRabim, it's a place where you're really allowed to be, v'yavar tachteh, and then he walks underneath it, tahor, so in that case he would be tar, he would remain pure. And Rashi explains, Tachten no fa'ilan shel olav fa'ilan. Again, under the tree means you're under the branches of the tree. V'mavar tamei k'nem afarish b'gemara. If he does go under the tree, he's tamei, like the Gemara will explain. Haisa gozelas as Rabim shayanofa notler Rishos HaRabim. If the branches are overhanging Rishos HaRabim, v'yavar tachteh atar, and then he goes under those branches, he's pure. And Rashi explains, Dahach tuma d'Rabbanan, because the whole tuma we're talking about over here is a d'Rabbanan tuma. Ukradim Aisinan b'gemara, and when we bring a pasuk in the Gemara, which we will bring a pasuk, asmachta b'almi, that's just a hint to the idea. Rashi says we're going to say this later on in Perek Rabbi Yishmael, that this tuma is just a tuma midrabanan. And in a case where the tree is stealing, so to speak, from the public, lo gazer rabbanan, the rabbanan did not make a gezerah. And the Gemara says, lo yeshev betzila, a person can't sit in the shade of the tree. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Rashi explains, Pshita, it's obvious, the lo yeshev betzila, it's obvious he can't sit in the shade of the tree. He's getting benefit then from Avoda Zara. What does the Mishnah even need to say that? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabba bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar Barchana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, lo nitzrucha elo letzeil tzila. We're talking about the shadow of the shadow. Rashi explains, letzeil tzila shachris v'arvis. In the morning and at night, shetzeil orach l'chol davar mo, there's a very long shadow. V'chol zman shelo avra midas orach hatzelas midas gova komasa ilan. The area where the shadow of the tree is not farther than the actual height of the tree, hatzel of v'choshach, there you have a very thicker shadow, it's darker. Mikan v'elach, but if you're already beyond the height of the tree, so then hatzel dak v'kolish, that's a lighter shadow. V'yitzel tzilo, that's what the Gemara means when it says tzel tzilo. V'yitzrich lashmin and dafila, but tzel tzilo lo yeshev. It's the Mishnah is teaching us that even in the shadow of the shadow, a person shouldn't sit there. That's what it means. Lo nitzrucha elo letzel tzila. The Gemara says, Mechlal, does this imply to vitzel komasa, that if he would be sitting in the shadow of the height of the tree, the darker part of the shadow, im yashav tamei, that if he sat there he'd be tamei? Is that the implication? Meaning, if the beginning of the Mishnah where it says your tahar is by tzel tzila, so maybe the actual tzila would be tamei. The Gemara says, Lo, no, dafil letzel komasa nami, even if he's in the darker part of the shadow, im yashav tar, if he sits there he's pure, because he's not under the branches. The Mishnah is simply teaching us that even in the shadow of the shadow, he should not sit there. And the Gemara continues, there are those who learn what we just said above on the end of the Mishnah. It said, that end line of that first part of the Mishnah. If he sat in the shade, so then he's pure. Pshita, isn't that obvious? He's not under the tree. Amar Rabba bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar Barchana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo nitzrucha el letzeil komasa. The Mishnah is necessary to teach us that even if it's in the darker part of the shadow, within the height of the tree, so even over there he's tahar. Mechlal de letzeil tzila afilo lechatchila yeshev. So now, according to this version, the Gemara says, does that imply that in the shadow of the shadow he's allowed to sit there even lechatchila? And the Gemara says, Lo, no. Hakamash Malana, just teaching us dafil letzeil komasa, that even in the darker part of the shadow, im yashav tar, if he sits over there, he is pure. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'lo yavor tachta," a person should not pass under the Asherah tree. V'yimavar tamei, and if he passes under the Asherah tree, he is tamei. The Gemara says, "My time, what's the reason why he's tamei? Iefsha deleka tikroves avodas kochavim, because it's impossible that there isn't some offering of Avoda Zara under the tree, and it's essentially a kind of a tumas ohel. The tree is an ohel over the tikroves avodas kochavim, and therefore he is tamei." The Gemara says, "Money." Now, who's the author of the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. It's Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, "Minayin l'tikroves avodas kochavim shematame ba'ohel." From where do we know that offerings of Avodah Zara have tumas ohel? Again, that's tumah of the tent. That if you and the tumas are, for example, underneath one tent, underneath the branches of the tree, underneath the same roof, that you're going to be tamei. How do you know that? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, "Vayitzamdu leval peor." It says they joined Baal Peor. Vayochlu zivchei mesim, and they ate from the sacrifices of the dead. And here we're talking about Avodah Zara, but we're referring to it as zivchei mesim. And so we learn as follows: Ma mes metami ba'oel, just like a dead body has tumas ohel, after karoves avodas kochav metami ba'oel, so two offerings of Avodah Zara have tumas ohel. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Haisa gozelas esarabim v'yavar tachtei atar." If the tree is stealing, so to speak, from the public, meaning it's hanging over the Rosh Hashanah, and the person walks under the tree, in that case he's tar, he's pure. And the Gemara says, "Iboilhu." They had the following question: Avar o over, does it mean that he passed, or he even is allowed l'chatchila to walk under the tree in such a situation? Does it just mean to say that if he did so, he is pure, or he l'chatchila can walk under the tree if it's overhanging the Rosh Hashanah? Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar Mishmei de Chizkiya Amar over. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar in the name of Chizkiya says he's l'chatchila allowed to walk under the tree. Rabbi Yochanan Amar imavar, and Rabbi Yochanan says no, if he walked under the tree, then he remains pure. But the Gemara notes velo pligi. They're actually not arguing; they're talking in different scenarios. In one case, we're talking where there's another way to go. If there's another way to go, so lechatchila he shouldn't go under the tree. And but the other case, we're talking where there's no other way to go, then lechatchila he's allowed to go under the tree. And the Gemara continues, Amalei Rav Sheshes l'shamei. Rav Sheshes said to his attendant, Ki motis lahasam, when you get to that Asherah tree, ar hitni, you should take me very quickly underneath the tree. The Gemara says, Hechidami, well, what's the case over there? If there's no other way to go, Lamali arhitni, what do you have to go fast for? Mishra Shari, it's totally permitted. And if there is another way to go, Kiyam arhitni mishari, so just by going fast, does that make it permitted? And the Gemara says, Liolam deleko dir chachrina. The case over there really was where there was not another way to go, and he really was allowed to go that way. It was permitted. The reason why he wanted to go quickly, vi adam chashav shani, an important person is different, should be a little more strict with himself, and that's why he wanted to go quickly. Rashi notes, Kimot is hasam, when you get over there, Rav Sheshes sagi naho rahava. Rav Sheshes was blind. V'zem Moshe, when this person was guiding him. V'aisa bi'iro asherah goes esarabim, and in his city there was an asherah that was stealing, so to speak, from the public. So Amar le Kimot is hasam. That's why I said to him when we get there, ar hitani mashcheni b'merutza, pull me quickly. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Zorin tachteha yirakos bimos hageshamim. A person can plant vegetables underneath an asherah tree in the rainy season, avalo bimos hachama, but not in the summer season. V'hachazerin, and when it comes to lettuce, lo bimos hachama, v'lo bimos hageshamim, that you can't plant under the asherah tree in the summer season or the rainy season. Rashi explains, Zorin tachteh yirakos bimos hageshamim. Again, in the rainy season, it's permitted. Sha'ilan gamhu kosher lehen, because there the tree's giving no benefit; it's actually bad. Shema'akev hachama milavo, because it's actually stopping the sun. And so, in a situation where the asherah tree is giving no benefit, it would be permitted. But bimos hachama in the summer season, avolo bimos hachama, Rashi says there you're not allowed to plant the vegetables. Shatsel yafa lehen, because the shade is actually good for the vegetables. And again, the whole point is you can't benefit from the asherah tree. And Rashi continues, Lo b'yamos hachama v'lo b'yamos hagasham. When it comes to lettuce, you can't plant in the shade of the asherah tree in the summer or in the rainy season. Shatzel yafe l'chazeres liolam, because when it comes to lettuce, the shade is always good for lettuce. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Aflo yirakos b'yamos hagashamim, even vegetables in general, you cannot plant under the asherah tree in the rainy season. Rabbi Yossi is arguing on the Tanakh being strict in the rainy season as well. Why? Mimnei shehanevoya no sheres alein, because the leaves are going to fall upon the vegetables, v'hava lehen lezevel, and it's going to be fertilizer, and so therefore that's also a benefit, and that's why that is problematic. And the Gemara says, Lememra, does our Mishnah mean to say, the Rabbi Yossi savar zev v'zeh gorem aser. Rabbi Yossi holds if you have two causes, then it is forbidden. Meaning to say, in a situation of the leaves dropping on the vegetables, they're contributing some nutrients, but there's other nutrients, of course, just coming from the ground. So some of what's being contributed is from the Avodah Zara tree, from the Asherah tree, but some is from mutter sources. And so it seems like Rabbi Yossi is saying, zev v'zeh gorem, if you have two causes for these vegetables to grow, that's forbidden. For Rabbanan Amri, zev v'zeh gorem mutter, and it sounds like the Rabbanan, they're the ones that are being lenient in the Mishnah, because they say zev v'zeh gorem is mutter. Rashi says, zev v'zeh nevoya de iser, that's the foliage, the leaves that fall on the vegetables, that's iser. The karka olam, and then there's the earth in general. The heter, that's heter. Gormel yirakos shigdalo, those are causing the vegetables to grow. And so therefore, again, it seems like Rabbi Yossi says zev v'zeh gorem is aser, and the Rabbanan say zev v'zeh gorem is mutter. But the Gemara asks, but we see the exact reverse. The Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, shocheg v'zora l'ruach, you grind up the Avodah Zara, you throw it into the wind, o meta l'yam, or you throw it into the sea. Amru lo, and they say back to him, the Rabbanan say back to Rabbi Yossi, afi nasa zevel, but then it's going to become fertilizer. V'nemar lo yidbak b'yadchem u'men acherim. It says you can't get any benefit from the Avodah Zara. And so therefore it seems that Rabbi Yossi is not concerned with the fact that it becomes fertilizer. Apparently he holds zev v'zeh gorem is mutter, and it's the Rabbanan who say that zev v'zeh gorem is aser. So kasha the Rabbanan ad Rabbanan, kasha the Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi, we have a contradiction now within the Rabbanan, and a contradiction within Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara says, B'shlomad Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi lo kasha. I understand we can answer the contradiction within Rabbi Yossi as follows. Hasam over there, the ka'azil li'ibud matter. Over there, let's say you're grinding it up, throwing it into the wind. So really it's going to be destroyed. The whole kavana, the whole intention over there is that it should be destroyed. So that's why it's mutter. But over here, where it drops down from the tree, directly the leaves fall onto the vegetables, the lo ka'azil li'ibud, it's not going to destruction. Aser, so then Rabbi Yossi would say aser. Rashi explains, Hasam Kazal Ibud La'avdahu Meskavin, his whole intention, where he's grinding it up and throwing to the wind, is to destroy it. It's already nullified from being an Avodah Zara. It's no different than an Avodah Zara. It's not worse than an Avodah Zara that breaks on its own. Therefore you could say it's not even Zev Zagorim. Because there's not such an Isser. Even the Rabbanan, they're only saying it's forbidden because of a decree. Maybe he'll lift it up and acquire it, like we say at the beginning of the parak. But here it's not going to destruction. This is normal that the leaves fall. Avodas Kochavim is not nullified when things happen in the normal course, natural course of events. So therefore you have a situation of Isser Hana, and it's Zev Zagorim, and it is Asr. But the Gemara continues and asks, even if you can resolve the contradiction within Rabbi Yossi, Ela de Rabbanan, ad Rabbanan Kasha, but you still have a contradiction within the Rabbanan, because again, in our Mishnah, the Rabbanan are Mekel. It seems to be that they're holding Zev Zagorim Mutter, but in the case where you're grinding up the Avodah Zara and throwing it into the wind, they're strict. It seems like Zev Zagorim is Asr. And so the Gemara continues and answers, Epoch, just reverse the Mishnah. Rashi says, Epoch Kulam Asnis, and reverse our entire Mishnah. V'lo Tishni de Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi Kiddushanis, don't answer the contradiction of Rabbi Yossi as you answered it, but rather make everything consistent. Our Mishnah, in our Mishnah as well, just like we find in the Mishnah over there, again, it's Rabbi Yossi is the one that is not concerned. He's the one that says Zev Zagorim is mutter, and it's the Rabbanan who say that Zev Zagorim is aser. And the Gemara continues, by saying, if you want, I could say another answer, Lo Seipach, you don't have to reverse our Mishnah, and the Rabbi Yossi Kiddushanin, and then with Rabbi Yossi, in terms of that contradiction, give the same answer that we gave above, meaning to say, Rabbi Yossi says it's permitted in the Mishnah where you grind up the Avodah Zara and throw it into the wind, because you're already being mevatel the Avodah Zara in that case, but in the case of the leaves, Rabbi Yossi would be machmir, because Zev Zagorim is aser. And the Rabbanan, in terms of the contradiction within the Rabbanan, again, the Rabbanan seem to be strict by grinding up the Avodah Zara and throwing it into the wind, but yet they allow it in our Mishnah. The answer is Kida Amar Rav Mori Bereider Rav Kahana. It's like Rav Mori, the son of Rav Kahana, said. He said Mashem Ashabiach Ba'or. This was with regards to Kachim. He said that which there is an improvement in the hide, Pogem Bebasar. There's actually a depreciation of value when it comes to the meat. This was with regards to Karbonos. The point over here just is that sometimes you have a situation where you can have an appreciation of value that's offset by a depreciation of value. And so the same thing is happening in our Mishnah. Mishnah according to the Rabbanan. Hachanami here also, Masha Mashbiach Benovia, whatever improvement there is from the fertilization of these leaves that drop, but Pogem Betzel, but it actually is a depreciation. It's getting a negative benefit when it comes to the shade, and that's why in the rainy season, specifically in the rainy season, the Rabbanan say it is permitted to plant those vegetables under the shade of the Asherah tree. Any benefit is going to be offset. But the Gemara continues, V'savar Rav Yossi Zev Zegorim Aser. Does Rav Yossi really hold Zev Zegorim is Aser? But the Gemara asks, V'hatnan, we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Arla, Rabbi Yossi, Omer Rabbi Yossi says, Note in Yichor Shel Arla, person can plant an Arla branch, V'ain note in Egos Shel Arla, but you're not allowed to plant a nut of Arla, Memnei Shupri, because that's considered a fruit, and if it's a fruit of Arla, it is forbidden. And the Gemara says, V'yomer Rav Yehuda Marav, and Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, Mod Rav Yossi, that Rav Yossi would admit, Shem Nata, that if he planted the Egos, if he planted the nut of Arla, V'hivrich V'hirkiv, or let's say he sank a branch of Arla into the ground, or he grafted a tree of Arla, so mutter, so it would be permitted, meaning to say, a person shouldn't do it lechatzchila, but after the fact, it would be mutter. Rashi explains, Shem Nata ha'egos, if he planted the nuts, shal Arla, v'Arla mutter be mutter. Alma ki gadol ha'ilan v'toin peiros, you see that when that tree grows and it has fruits, havilu hanach peiros, begrama de egos de ister, v'karka de heter. Those fruits that come from the new tree, it's zev zegorim, it's coming from the nut of ister, but it's also coming from the earth of heter. V'gatani mutter, and what does it say? It says mutter. So you see from here that Rabbi Yossi holds zev zegorim is actually mutter. V'tanya nami hachi, we have a brisa like this as well. Mod Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Yossi admits. And we will take a look at Rashi a little earlier in terms of the context of Rav Mari's statement. Again, Rav Mari said, Masha mashbiach ba'or, pogem bebasar, whatever you gain by the hide, you lose by the meat. Ud Rav Mari gabe ein margilin bepsule mukdoshim lahavshe derech haraglayim, kein mapuach shel nefachim ba'alimumen sheniftu v'shachton letzarcho. This is talk about a certain way to strip the hide off the animal. And the point is, v'afal pi shaor nimkar b'yoker, even though when you do that, if you're going to take off the hide all at once, you can actually sell it for a higher price. Asur lahargal, still you can't do that. Lafisha bizoyon kodshim, because it's a bizoyon, it's degrading to kodshim. Shemekalkel habasar, because it ruins the meat. So even though there's a gain on the hide, it's ruining the meat. And so kashal and hasam, we ask over there, amai, why should that be? Hapseida the hekdashu, isn't hekdash then losing out? The avisharis le lahargil v'limchor ha'or biyoker, have a tvei parak lumei. If you would allow to sell that hide at the more expensive rate, so then he's going to redeem it from the outset, it's going to be a gain to hekdash. Vishani Rav Mari, and Rav Mari answers, Lekup say that's actually not really a loss. Because whatever gain there is in the value of the hide, Pogem b'dmei habasar, goes down in terms of the value of the meat. And so again, we apply the same idea over here. Masha mashbiach benivya, whatever you gain with the leaves falling on in terms of fertilizer, Pogem b'tzel, the shade actually ruins. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph.